The previous parsha we speak Kabbalah Torah, Kleisro at the level of the Memte Shari Tara, the 49th level of purity. They said Nasa v'Nishma, and then the parsha ends about building a mizbeach and how you have to conduct yourself. And the first halacha, which the Torah presents, is setting up a judicial system. These are the laws. And we speak about a Jew steals, and he's not able to repay the person he victimized, and he's sold into slavery. I mean, after achieving such a level of one of the historical accomplishments in the history of existence, no human being or people have ever reached this level. God has never communicated with the people. We were taken to be the Am Kodosh, the Goy Kodosh, the chosen people, the Mamachos Kohanim. The first thing you communicate to us, that when you set up a judicial system, if a man steals and he's not able to repay what he had stolen, he sold for 6 years, and so on and so forth. They give him a Canaanite wife. I mean, there's so many things the Torah could have discussed right after Kabbalah Torah. Why specifically does the Torah speak about this particular halacha? So the Ramban speaks about this. But the question is very obvious. Before I tell you what the Ramban says, the first thing that came to mind was that very often, as a human being, and this is one of the reasons why people fail very often, because we're not really aware or sensitive to our vulnerabilities. And if we'd realize to what degree we are vulnerable to these seductions of the Yetzer Hara, of the evil inclination, it's like a person was an alcoholic, and he hadn't drunk for 25 years. But he was always warned that as long as he's away from it, the moment he's near it, he'll have a level of temptation. And once he takes that first sip, he's back where he started from. Goes right back to that addiction, and it will be out of control. We achieved Sinai. We ascended to the 49th level of purity. But you realize, as a human being, it's a slippery slope. The moment, if you think you're not vulnerable to losachmod, it all starts with losachmod. You have a design on someone else's, his property, his horse, his cow, his wife, his possessions. And at a subconscious level, you have your eye on it. And because of that, you feel denied. And if you feel denied and you can't satisfy what you're denied, materially speaking, very often we justify doing certain things. At first it's called, every embezzler, when he embezzles, we're not talking about an outright thief. He believes he'd be able to repay it. He takes it first, he believes he'll be able to repay it. But then he realizes that he can't. And once he can't, he may even take more, to a point where he becomes a conscious thief, and somehow he doesn't think about it any longer. And he falls to a level that he's a thief. So therefore, although we're at the equivalent of angels, Nasa v'Nishma, but we still have to talk about a Jewish slave, a slave that steals. A person steals, you're not able to compensate the victim, and you can't pay, you're sold into slavery, and the value of the sale is to compensate and reimburse the person who actually it's stolen from. This is the idea. I'd ask the question, we all know that, we discussed this before Pesach, that chometz always represents desire and arrogance. Why? Something which is leavened is much tastier. Something that's leavened rises. All the characteristics which represent the negativity in a human being are represented through chometz. Chometz, in the words of the Zohar, represents the sitra achra, the evil inclination. Because when you partake of that, you're touched by that, and therefore you actually could actually fail because of that. Torah says for 7 days you have to eat matzah. Matzah is low. Low represents humility. The blandness represents you weaning yourself from desire. And when it's baked with a specific intent, and we eat it at the Seder, that is a spiritual infusion that allows us to be tempered and fortified, spiritually speaking, that we should be less vulnerable to the temptations of the evil inclination. And for 7 days, although the matzah may not be matzah of mitzvah, but still unleavened. And if the Torah says for 7 days, that is your daily dose of the grain product, and you, besides fulfilling a mitzvah and not violating a negative commandment, that will maintain you throughout the year if you fill in all the other gaps. So we ask the question. The Maral of Prague explains the korban omer, which is brought on the second day of Pesach, is of barley grain. And the shtei alechem, the communal offering, which is brought on Shavuos, is wheat flour. All meal offerings are of wheat flour, not of barley. There are only 2 meal offerings of barley. That's the shtei alechem, that's the omer. The omer, which permits us to partake of grain on an ordinary level, the new grain, and the mitchas sota. If a woman is a suspected adulteress and she claims her innocence, she has to bring, before the Kohen administers the water with the obliterated, rid of the sota, she has to bring a mitchas omer. She brings this meal offering, which a mitchas sota, which is comprised of barley grain, not wheat. So the Gemara says, why does she bring barley grain? So the Mishnah says in Sota that just as barley is machol behema, its consumption is animal fodder, because she behaved, even if she's innocent, and she did not commit adultery, her behavior is totally unacceptable. Her husband forewarned her. She defied his warning. She goes and secludes herself with another man, and she puts herself in the position, it's questionable whether she committed adultery. It's unacceptable. Even if she did not commit adultery, the whole concept of husbandry, she's not an animal. So because she behaved without the responsibility of a wife to a husband, to connote that and emphasize that, her meal offering is made of barley grain. That's the Mishnah. So because of that, therefore, her meal offering is barley. So the Maral asks, so what about why the Omer offering? 2 days into Pesach, we bring the meal offering. It's made of barley. So the Maral explains that spiritually speaking, what was our spiritual value? We left Egypt, we were devoid of spirituality. In terms of what the human being should be, Atim Kriyim Odom, we should have been fully infused with spirituality. We should have been at the Mem Tashari Tara, or at the Mem Tashari Tuma. So what was our value at that time, the equivalent of an animal? So to connote that spiritual status, what is the communal offering? It's barley. The meal offering is barley. On Shavuos, we reached the pinnacle of our spirituality. We became Odom. At the time of Kabbalah Torah, Atim Kriyim Odom. Therefore, to connote that classification of person, it's wheat. Because the Gemara says the main consumption of a human being is what? Is wheat flour, not barley. This is the Maral. Therefore, the Omer is barley, and the Shtei Alechem, the 2 loaves that are also its communal meal offering, on Shavuos is made of wheat. However, all meal offerings are not chametz. There are only 2 meal offerings which are chametz. The Toda offering. The Toda has 40 loaves of bread you bring, 30 of matzah, 10 of chametz. The Shtei Alechem, it's a meal offering, it's chametz. It's chametz. So the question is, if actually the wheat loaves of bread connote that we achieve the ultimate level, that we reach that pinnacle of spirituality, that's why it's wheat, so definitely it should not be chametz. Chametz represents the Yetzer Hara. The Yetzer Hara, that's the evil inclination. But it has to be made in a context of chametz. It cannot be matzah. The question is why. The Maral doesn't discuss this part. So what I said was exactly, we're speaking about the Eved Ivri. Although we reach the pinnacle of our spirituality and we're at that special level, but how long does it take to go down that slippery slope? Moshe Rabbeinu, we hear the Aseret Dibros from Hashem, the 10 Commandments. 40 days later, Moshe, according to their calculation, is delayed. What happens? We're vulnerable for the Chet HaEgel, golden calf. So what does that say? You're never secure. Regardless of where you're at, you always have to have your guard up. And this is what it says in Pirkei Avos, Asisi Ogle Torah. A Jew has to continuously understanding, but you have to understand, you have to make fences. The rabbinical fences, then we have to have self-imposed fences. Because everybody has to recognize his vulnerabilities, and each person has his personal vulnerabilities, and based on that, we have to create our own fences. So therefore, that's the idea of why it's chametz. Although it's wheat, which you achieve the ultimate, but even at that moment, you have to realize you're not guaranteed to be there. And therefore, we find that Hashem, even the Avos HaKadoshim, the holy patriarchs, he did not associate his name with them until after they passed away, except for Yitzchak. Why? Because you could be at a level of Avram Avinu, who introduces monotheism to the world, and you could achieve the Akedah, which is the ultimate test. But yet Hashem will not associate Elokei Avram until Avram Avinu passes away. Why? Because you're not guaranteed until you breathe your last breath of life. Because at the last moment, God forbid, a person can do that U-turn, and God forbid, he could take another path. Therefore, Hashem will not associate his name, say Elokei, that person, until after he passes away. But again, so this emphasizes again this concept that even if you're at the ultimate level, it's still chametz because we still have that Yetzer Hara.